All right, today is April 24, 2024. This is the meeting of the Container Storage Interface Community. On the agenda today, we have stateful format tracking from Rohit. So with that, let me hand it off to Rohit. Rohit, do you want to talk through this?
Well, I gotta get the volume turned up. It's too quiet.
Let me see if I can join through the web client, and then I can share my screen.
Sounds
And maybe you can continue the video feed here, and I'll just share my screen.
All right, Rohit's gonna try to join on his computer.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit unwieldy, I think, if we try to use the same computer for video and for
Possibly.
presenting.
Yeah. All right. While Rohit is joining, let me just give the background to this.
Yep.
So, one of the issues that we've known about for a long time is that trying to get the video pointed the right way. Formatting file system volumes in CSI is an implicit operation. Like, it's just meant to happen sometime during node stage or node publish. The volume has to get formatted if the underlying system is a block device. And what can happen is if the device is large enough and format takes a long time and the pod crashes or the machine loses power in the middle of the format.
Or if you even have network web sometimes, like we've seen.
There's lots of reasons that, it can get halfway done. And then, of course, Kubernetes happily just retries. And the issue is it can be very hard to figure out in your CSI plugin, like, did the previous format complete or not? Right. So if you look at the drive and it's all zeros, you can be reasonably sure that it's not formatted. But if you see like a super block that looks like an ext4 super block, all you can really do is like an FSCK to try to figure out if it's formatted or not.
And even that's dangerous because you might be FSCKing something that you shouldn't be, and then you might lose data. There might be things that the admin can do if you actually say, hey, wait, I'm not supposed to format those. I thought I already formatted those.
Yeah. At a high level, the problem is when you're in this situation, you risk either going forward with a partially formatted volume, in which case you're going to get data corruption, or formatting a volume that already had data on it, in which case you're going to get data corruption. Yeah. So like there's no good choices other than to explicitly store somewhere the result of the format operation, either by reserving some blocks at the beginning of the disk and writing state there, which almost nobody does, or by using the stateful service on the back end of the CSI plugin to track, did the format succeed or not?
Yeah. And the other thing I'd like to add is that our code becomes extremely complex and extremely error prone as we deal with like all sorts of different failure scenarios because we're not just like in node stage volume, we're not just running node stage volume, we're also actively trying to interpolate the state, right? And the state could be one of many, many things. And so if we basically get carte blanche to come in and say, well, you know what, you have to format this device, it makes the code a lot more simpler, a lot more maintainable, and a lot more robust.
Right. So I think at least some plugins will explicitly track this to address that problem, and we're thinking it makes sense to standardize this in CSI, basically as an extra bit of state that the CO must store, and inform the SP, whether a previous format has ever succeeded on this volume or not, because the good news is if you've never successfully formatted the volume before, like any data in there the volume has never been exposed to an end user. They couldn't have ever written any data. So trashing the entire volume is safe if you've never gotten to the end of a node stage, node publish sequence, right?
Yeah, and I think we're exploiting that fact a lot in this design to basically always fall back to a safe place. And if you're not, then you're very, very sure that it should be safe to just wipe everything and continue.
Yeah.
So I think my question would be, given that CSI tries to make these calls as much as possible idempotent, we say, an error can happen, anything can happen, you can have a timeout, and to recover from that, we say CSI should just be idempotent, we can call the same call again and it should safely be able to do whatever it needs to do. And it sounds like in this case, it can't in some edge cases. My question would be, can the plugin itself store state about the format internally? Why do we need to expose this at the CSI level necessarily?
So plugins can, and I mentioned that the two ways, but
Yeah.
they're both relatively awkward.
Yeah, I think we mentioned both of them as alternatives. Like
Yeah,
we could open up a back channel to the controller, we can carve out some space, store our own
Yeah,
metadata.
the issue is that like it's the node plugin that needs to know this fact, and the node plugin typically doesn't have access to some backend database where it can like store data, right? Because it's the node plugin. And so if the controller plugin like keeps track of this information and passes it in the volume or the published context, and there's a way for the node plugin to like notify the controller plugin when the format is completed, like that is one way to solve this problem. And I've written at least one driver that does exactly that. But it's a problem that every single driver faces, and the pattern of having the node plugin open up a socket to the controller plugin and like send information is kind of a security vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's not desirable. This is the kind of thing where that if the CO could store the state explicitly, it makes everyone's life way more easy and secure. So so the actual proposal is quite simple, right? It's just pass in a bit and return a bit and have the CO store it. All of the complexity in the design, I think, is around how do you make this backwards compatible with all the existing implementations that old versions of Kubernetes talking to new CSI plugins and new versions of Kubernetes talking to old versions of CSI plugins. We're trying to address all of that in the design, but I think it's tractable, and I think that if we can get buy-in on the CSI plugin idea and present a KEP, it wouldn't be a very heavy lift to at least, well, it wouldn't be a heavy lift to implement the feature in the sidecars. I think the most complicated part would be actually evolving the PV object to add a new field to be the place to store this bit.
That's correct.
So I'll turn it over to Rohit to present the actual proposal.
Sounds good.
Let me share my host disabled attendee screen.
Yeah, you got to make Rohit the host.
Yep, hang on.
So basically the CSI driver will need to know, right, how to recover, like continue to formatting?
So CSI drivers already have to do this, right? Because it already happens that node stage gets interrupted halfway through, node publish can get interrupted halfway through, and Kubernetes will just retry. So this is a problem CSI drivers already face. I suspect a lot of them don't handle it very well, but it's not a new problem.
Yeah.
The idea is, well, go ahead. We got the presentation here.
Yeah, so I think the two scenarios that I'm describing that we hit a bunch of times and we've kind of hacked and worked our way around is that if node stage volume is to format a PV, but it fails to complete and the pod associated with the PV is migrated to another node, then the new node stage volume should proceed to format said PV. I think that case is pretty straightforward. However, that state, I guess, is like effectively indeterminate if, like, for instance, we actually do succeed the format, or if we have like a half formatted PV. And if we see a file system that's already present, it isn't necessarily clear as to how the node plugin should proceed, right? And so that's where the current drivers that we have today kind of try to figure out and interpolate the state, and unfortunately, they often get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And then another scenario that can also happen is that sometimes we see node stage volume actually hit a transient error, and as a result, return a failure, but they've committed half of their work. And so that effectively leaves the PV once again in an indeterminate state, and then node stage volume comes in and it tries to interpolate the state, and then there are bugs in there. And sometimes these bugs are not just in node stage volume, they're also in like other utilities that we use to try to interpolate that state. So for instance, we had a bunch of block ID bugs that we've hit. where we try to gauge what the underlying file system is, and we, because of some random bug in some file system drivers somewhere, we actually get the wrong value, and then we say, well, we're in this wacky state. In all of these cases, it turns out that the right solution for us is to go ahead and format, but instead we just stop, spin our wheels forever, and just say, well, until someone actually fixes all these bugs and backports all the bugs to like everywhere, we
Right. And the reason we stop is because we don't want to be responsible for
Yeah.
deleting someone's volume full of data by formatting it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a problem space. And then in terms of design, we're thinking of adding a new format state field to the PV. And the format state can be in one of three states. The first state is format unknown. This is the default state. We also very frequently fall back into this state if, for instance, one of the components is not completely up to date, right?
And to be clear, this is the state you're always in today.
Yes.
In Kubernetes.
Yeah.
You're always in format unknown right now.
So as Ben is saying, basically, our thought process here is that if you ever fall into this case, you're no worse off than you are today, right? And so we've tried to be as careful about upgrade concerns as possible.
Yeah.
So, and then the other two states are format requested and format done. So format requested, this is the state that you set the PV to when the controller actually supports the functionality and it wants the node driver to go ahead and actually attempt to do the format.
Which implies you're running a version of Kubernetes and a version of the CSI plugin and versions of sidecars that all understand this new feature.
And if any of them don't, even though it might send this in the response, it'll automatically be dropped down to format unknown.
Yeah.
And then format done means that node stage volume or node publish volume, wherever the particular driver decides to actually do the format, has finished its work, it's returned successfully, and it's actually established a format on the underlying PV. And so as a part of this, we anticipate we're going to have to modify, in addition to the PV, modify the following gRPC calls. So there's create.
Although the node publish volume response probably doesn't need a modification.
Yeah, I mean, this design is evolving.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're possibly going to revisit this particular one. But create volume response, node stage volume request, node stage volume response, node publish volume request. Right now, we're thinking of sticking in a format state into these messages. I think Ben and I have an idea, which we're tossing around, whereby we won't need to do that. We can probably just get away with a Boolean, we're thinking, if we correctly track what the driver plugin supports.
Yeah. So in addition to this, there would be a new controller capability and a new node capability asserting that the plugin implements this new feature, and they'd have to be the same.
They'd have to be the same, exactly. Yeah. And so what we're thinking is we can actually simplify some of this flow with that assumption in mind. But for now, I think what we have is complete and functionally complete, so it makes sense to go through it. So create volume response will now set by default set a format state to unknown, but in the case where the controller supports this and it actually wants the driver to go ahead and complete the format, it will set this field to format requested. If a format is not required and somehow the driver has already created something that is formatted, it'll set the state to format done right off the bat. And so if the CSI provisioner sidecar supports a feature and it sees, a format state of format requested, it sets that format state. And I think it also, this should be format requested or format done. And in all other cases, I don't know. Format. In all other cases, it will set the state on the PD to format unknown. And so on the node stage volume request, kubelet is going to take a look at the format state that's on the PD. If the format state is format requested, it'll set that that field into its message onto the node stage volume request. And this also would potentially do format done. I forgot about the case where there are some CSI drivers which actually do support formatting right off the bat. So for node stage volume response, this is the gRPC response to this request. And this now has a format state that defaults to format unknown. And if you're given format unknown, that means that there's something in the system that doesn't play this game. So you should fall back to the default behavior. And with the default behavior, you are exercising the legacy flows. So that's no worse than what we have today. However, if you see that your input was format requested and you were able to actually format the PD, then you return format done. And if the state was format requested, but the next stage actually does the format like node stage volume, then you leave in your response, you still leave the state as format requested. And so essentially, this is the truth table we came up with. So if you have a format state of like if this is the input format state and this is the response format state, the middle, the table itself represents what the final state of the PV should be.
This is Kubelet will update the PV object with
Kubelet will stamp it
with
as a
the new state.
And of course, if the state is the same, it doesn't need to do anything.
Yeah.
So even though I've said PD is marked with blah, 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 I think we can save on that gRPC call in the case that the state doesn't change. So
if I understand correctly, the format is happening on the node.
That's right.
And it's being triggered by Kubernetes. And the problem is that if the state of that format is lost, Kubernetes doesn't know what to do. It may
Well, no, it's not. So Kubernetes expects CSI to just deal with this for it, right? Kubernetes just says, all I need to do is call node stage and node publish and I'm good.
Yeah. And
so it pushes all the problems down to the CSI plugin. The CSI plugin has to, let's say it's an iSCSI volume. The CSI plugin has to establish the iSCSI connection, find the LUN.
We have a list here.
And then look at the blocks of the LUN and guess, does this thing need a format or not? And if it's like a terabyte volume, and it's got something that looks kind of like an ext4 signature, like how do you know?
Yeah, and it also gets more complicated once you have like we're adding lux and other things as the picture, and that just makes it even more complicated.
But if the format is handled entirely on the CSI driver side, going back to my question of why does CSI need to be aware of this? I think you mentioned like, hey, there's potentially security concerns and like
it's because the idempotency requirement that you just look at the volume and figure out what state it's in is a fundamentally impossible problem, right? If you have a terabyte of random data that's probably a Lux volume that might have an ext file system inside of it, like how do you establish with certainty what state it's in? Like that's a hard problem. And so
in the face of all the different kind of errors that
got it. So basically the problem is we don't have on the CSI driver side anywhere to store state about the state of that volume.
Yes,
and
we can come up with, it is possible to come up with bespoke solutions, but I think this is a common problem.
Yes, right. Everyone has to deal with this.
Yeah.
Who has a file system on block solution, which is probably like 90% of CSI drivers.
That's right.
And there was the volume context fields that we kind of used as a general cookie in CSI in the past to say, hey, if you have some information that's relevant that you are unable to store, but you need it in the future, you can pass it back, using this volume context to Kubernetes. Kubernetes will store it in the PV object and return it to you. Can we?
And the published context, and that works for one-way communication from controller to node, but the node has no way to pass the information back to the controller when the format is succeeded, to say like, I got all the way to the end of my format process, and I'm now returning success from node published volume, and the workload is going to start writing data to it. There's no channel to communicate that fact back to the controller.
I see. The
It's
context
just,
is basically attach information. It's not information after a mount is completed or during a mount going the other direction. I see. I wonder if we need something like, instead of being very specific about formatting, like this becomes like a general, similar to the context for publish.
but you're suggesting we broaden the solution to have basically a channel for the node to return
Yeah,
information back to the controller.
I mean, we could make this a generic thing whereby we're passing in the format state everywhere, right? And so in theory, this could be some YAML, this could be some
In CSI, they're just string maps. Like the things like published context, volume context are just string maps.
but essentially this is some object which can get mutated by the node, right? So I was thinking about that. I felt like I wasn't sure whether that was the right approach to pursue, mainly because I don't know enough about CSI, but also because I thought format was a very specific problem.
Yeah.
But if you think this is a something which could be used in other contexts, I think we can.
Well, I want to play. So, Saad, did you think through more of what you're thinking? Or?
No, I think this was just exploring the possibilities.
Yeah. I think the hardest part of this whole process, if we go down this proposal, is Kubernetes is going to have to store this 3-state enum thing, and it's going to have to be stored in the PV object, and changing anything in the Kubernetes API is always a bear. If we want like a more generalized like published or some node context that can get communicated back to the controller, like that's going to be an even heavier lift on the Kubernetes API side, right? Because we're going to have to store that somewhere. I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe a big change is as much work as a small change, because a change is a change and it has to go through the process. Right. So maybe it is. Maybe we could just stuff another string map somewhere in the PV object.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to work through. I think we should work through all the corner cases to make sure that this works.
And I think if we don't have any relevant examples of anything beyond format, then it makes sense to keep it specific.
Yeah. Well, why don't we, like, maybe we could think about whether there are other cases that you can think of offline.
Well, I mean, we know that the node stage, node publish process can consist of many phases, right? Like we're talking if there's Lux involved,
Sure.
If there's make FS, like you could have gotten halfway through the Lux, you could have gotten all the way through the Lux, you could have gotten partway through the format, you could have gotten. There's lots of, but the upside of this proposal is it doesn't matter how far you got if you never got to the end of the node publish and our workload never got to see the volume, it's always safe to go back to the beginning and wipe everything on that volume, right? Because you can say with certainty, if you have this bit, that it's impossible that there's user data in the volume. So I can just wipe it and start again. That's.
I think we can keep that behavior though.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying that that aspect of it means that we can get away with just one piece of information, because you don't need all the intermediate states. You just need to say, did it get to the end? If not, go back to the beginning and just start over.
No, but I think we can still do that with the object that we're passing through, right? So basically, I think maybe I'm completely off base here, but if I understand what happens is that instead of storing a specific enum that has to be interpreted, CSI just stores some metadata.
Oh, no.
It understands and the controller understands, right?
If we go down the path of saying, there's a context, then yeah. The CO would be responsible for storing the whole string map in the PV.
Yeah.
And being able to pull it back out.
And then basically the driver interprets it and the controller interprets it.
But
that's pretty much it.
But the argument I was making is we probably don't need it, because this is such a powerful mechanism with just the 3 states that that we are proposing.
I think the place where maybe I'm losing you is I think we just maintain it to 3 states. It's just Kubernetes, in my mind, kubelet and the provisioner no longer have to interpret that thing. They just basically throw in the string map and then receive the string map, do a diff. If there's a difference, then push it to the PV. And if there isn't, then they just leave the PV as is.
Oh, okay. So this is a scratch space for the node.
That's what
And-
Saad, maybe you had something else in mind,
Yeah,
but that's what I was
no.
interpreting.
But interestingly, like this would never get back to the controller, and it might not matter that it doesn't get back to the controller.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's really what we're trying to do is we're trying to coordinate in between successive iterations of the node plugin for this specific problem. So the
Yeah.
controller doesn't really care.
Okay. Yeah, there's something tickling my brain that
We should work through this.
we
just to
may
make sure.
want to be able to loop the controller back in at some point, so it becomes informed of what happened. Because there are issues where like
But there's nothing stopping the controller in the future from looking at that string map and then interpreting it.
sure there is.
What?
Because unless we propose, because this is all on the Kubernetes side, unless we make a CSI proposal, this context would never get passed into the controller plugin.
Well, I thought we were stamping it on the PV, right?
Yeah. But
So
CSI plugins don't see PVs; they see CSI RPCs. That's all they ever see. So we have to.
no, but essentially every single. Oh, I see what you're saying.
The controller will never become aware of this because it can't inspect the
Well,
PV.
What happens when it calls list volumes? Does it get
List volumes is optional. No one implements it. It's
Yeah, so there is no explicit, but even in our proposal as is, we don't have an explicit pushback to the controller for anything, right? We're not circling back to the controller.
that may be a gap because we may want that, but
Okay.
but we might be able to live without it. Yeah, let's proceed without worrying about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether we have just a single variable with 3 states or a full string map that gets stashed in the PV, both of those I think would be equally valuable
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
for the ability to basically do this logic.
Yeah, I think what would happen though is instead of like a PV format state proposal, this becomes like a node scratch space almost.
We
node
would just call
driver
it node
scratch
volume
space.
context or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And the idea would be, the CO would be responsible for persisting the node volume context if it had the capability to do so.
Yeah.
And node plugins would be obligated to operate without it for backwards compatibility.
Yeah.
So we can expand it along those lines.
Yeah, well, let's work through those details. Just to make sure, because you and I work through so many upgrade cases.
And
I don't want to say right off. I mean, this was a thought I had.
I have some more that we can go into later.
Yeah.
But
I had a thought in passing about this approach. I think it works, but we haven't thoroughly vetted it. So.
Did you have anything more to present?
No. I mean, there's also no published volume, but it's pretty much the same.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So the idea is we have to pass this in and out of both stage and publish because CSI doesn't specify which one is supposed to do the format. It just has to be done by the time publish returns.
I think you touched on the alternatives, right?
Yeah. So are there any other high level questions about this proposal? Does anyone think this is a terrible idea?
No, I'm convinced it's useful. I think it's just going to be devil's going to be in the details, how exactly we implement it. Xing, your thoughts?
I think I have to read this more closely.
Okay, well,
See, if
we
it's
probably
possible.
need to do another revision of this that includes capabilities and maybe changes the format of the tables because we definitely want to have capability bits on both the node and the controller if we get on this path that the CO can inspect.
Yeah,
and
I think that it simplifies.
And we'll think through whether just replacing this tri-state value with a full context makes things easier or more complicated. And then maybe come back next time with updates. if there aren't any other questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Shane, go ahead and review it in its current state. Just expect it to continue to evolve. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't expect like we might change the representation a little bit, but I think the core idea is probably not subject to change. And the core idea is that we are trying to establish whether we have successfully formatted the underlying PD, and we do that so that we can either very simply and very cleanly go through and nuke the underlying state, or whether we need the administrator to come in and try to attempt some form of manual recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you have very, very complicated format processes that get interrupted, it's so hard to figure out whether it's safe to start over or not.
Yeah. Oh, one thing which we did not mention was the risks that you and I talked about.
Which risks?
So specifically, now that there is now a field on the PD, which if abused or if hacked, can result in data loss, right? So,
Yeah. The idea is if it is formatted and then someone intentionally changes it to format requested, a CSI plugin will respond by basically nuking the volume, which wouldn't happen in the current model, because right now CSI plugins are obligated to figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
So that.
Well, it might happen in the current model, but it shouldn't happen in the current model.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But I mean, but that would just be the system working as designed.
Yes.
It's just one more way for someone to shoot themselves in the foot if they don't know what they're doing.
And I think the other point that you and I discussed was that there are a lot of CRs in K8s, and if someone goes in and just started going ham on the API server, updating random CRs, do a lot of damage.
I don't think this is something we just wanted to call it out as plugins will start to rely on the state being accurate, and if a malicious person twiddles it, malicious bad things will happen.
Yeah. So it's a powerful tool, but it can also be dangerous, just like a lot of other things in the API server.
Yeah, I suspect we're going to get a lot of those changes if we go through API, a lot of those questions if we go through API review. But we can deal with those later. Overall, this sounds good to me. I think one more thing I would say is share the proposal with the SIG storage group. I put the link in the notes to the agenda for the next meeting, which is next Thursday, not this Thursday. It'd be good to just, get more input from folks like Jan, who I think are very familiar with this code path as well.
Yeah. I was hoping we'd have a bigger audience here, but I wanted to start with this group, and then of course we'll share it with SIG storage.
Sounds good.
So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Any other topics for this meeting, we can move on.
I think that was the only item on the agenda. Anything else from anyone? All
I
right.
think last time I said I might bring a topic about the volume group snapshot, but it turns out CSI spec already has the information that we need, so we actually don't need to make CSI spec changes.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, cool. If there's nothing else, I'll give you time back in your day. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.